My name is Jack. I never imagined that one day I'd be sitting down to tell this story. I always thought that people who went through such things were somehow different from me, that their lives must have had signs or hints that something was wrong. But looking back, maybe there were signs. Maybe I just didn't see them. Or maybe I didn't want to see them. But now, here I am, recounting the events that led to the most painful realization of my life. It all started about 2 years ago. I had just turned 35 and had been married to Emily for 10 years. We lived in a small town in Ohio, where life was simple, and people knew each other by name. I worked as an insurance adjuster, a job that wasn't particularly exciting but paid the bills and provided a stable life for us. Emily was a nurse at the local hospital. She was the kind of person who made friends easily, always smiling and full of life. I loved that about her. Our life was ordinary. We had a modest house with a neatly kept lawn. On weekends, we'd go to the farmer's market, take long walks in the park, or have dinner with friends. We didn't have kids, though we had talked about it on and off. It always seemed like there was more time, that we could wait until we were more settled, until we had more savings, until whatever milestone we thought was necessary had been reached. One day, I got a call from a company in Columbus. They were looking for an experienced adjuster to handle more complex claims. The job paid significantly more than my current position, and it felt like the kind of opportunity I shouldn't pass up. I discussed it with Emily and she was supportive. She said it would be a great step for us, that we could finally start thinking about those bigger plans we always put off. So, I took the job. The commute was about an hour each way, which wasn't ideal, but it was manageable. The new job was challenging, but I enjoyed it. I felt like I was making a difference, and the extra money was a bonus. Emily and I started talking seriously about buying a new house, maybe even starting a family. It felt like everything was falling into place. But then, things started to change. Emily began working more night shifts at the hospital. She said they were short-staffed, and she was covering for other nurses. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was dedicated to her job, and I admired that. But as the months went by, I started to notice small changes. She seemed distant, preoccupied. We didn't spend as much time together as we used to, and when we did, she was often tired or distracted. One evening, I came home early from work, feeling unusually tired. Emily wasn't home, which wasn't surprising since she had mentioned she was working late. I decided to take a shower and relax. As I was getting undressed, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily. She said she was going to be even later than expected, that a patient had needed emergency surgery, and she was staying to assist. I texted back, telling her not to worry, and that I'd see her when she got home. I made myself dinner, watched some TV, and eventually went to bed. I woke up around midnight, hearing the front door open and close quietly. Emily slipped into bed next to me, and I pretended to be asleep. I felt her sigh heavily before she turned away from me. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself that I was being paranoid, that Emily was just tired from work. But the feeling lingered. Over the next few weeks, I started paying more attention to the details. Emily's phone, which she used to leave lying around, was now always with her. She seemed to be texting more frequently, and there were moments when she would smile at her screen, a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in a while. I knew I needed to talk to her, but I didn't know how to start. I didn't want to come across as accusatory or paranoid, so I waited, hoping that things would go back to normal. But they didn't. One Saturday, dear viewers, more than 90% watch my content without subscribing. If you still have not subscribed, then I ask you to do so. For me, this is the best motivation to continue. Emily was scheduled to work a day shift. I decided to surprise her with lunch, something I hadn't done in a while. I picked up her favorite sandwich from a local deli and headed to the hospital. When I got there, I was told by one of the nurses that Emily wasn't working that day. Confused, I thanked her and left. I called Emily's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted her, asking where she was, but got no reply. I drove around aimlessly, trying to make sense of what I had just learned. After about an hour, I decided to head home. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed a car parked a few houses down. It was a car I didn't recognize. I didn't think much of it at the time, but something about it felt out of place. When Emily finally came home that evening, I asked her how her day was. She told me it was exhausting, that the hospital was busier than usual. I didn't mention my visit or the car. I just listened, trying to piece together the fragments of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. Over the next few weeks, I noticed more inconsistencies. Emily's stories about her shifts didn't always add up. She'd say she was working, but I'd find out later that she wasn't on the schedule. The car I had seen that day appeared a few more times, always parked in the same spot a few houses down. One day I decided to follow the car. I felt like a character in a detective novel, my heart pounding as I tried to keep a safe distance. The car led me to a small coffee shop on the other side of town. I parked a few spots away and watched as Emily got out of the car and walked inside. She wasn't alone. A man followed her and they sat down together at a table near the window. They were laughing, talking, and it was clear from their body language that this was more than just a casual meeting. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I wanted to storm in there, to confront them both, but I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring at the two of them, my mind racing. After what felt like an eternity, they got up and left. I watched as they drove away together, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront Emily right then and there, to demand answers, but another part of me wanted to pretend I hadn't seen anything, to hold on to the life we had built, even if it was based on a lie. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying the scene at the coffee shop over and over again. When Emily came home that evening, I tried to act normal. I asked her about her day, and she gave me the same tired story about work. I nodded, pretending to listen, but my mind was elsewhere. I knew I couldn't keep this up. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The next day, I called in sick to work. I needed time to think, to figure out my next move. I decided to hire a private investigator. It felt extreme, but I needed proof. I needed to know if what I had seen was just a misunderstanding or something more. The investigator's name was Tom. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, ex-cop, with a reputation for getting results. I met him at a diner on the outskirts of town and explained my situation. Tom listened quietly, taking notes. He asked me a few questions about Emily's schedule, the man I had seen her with, and any other details I could remember. He assured me that he'd find out the truth and promised to be discreet. I handed him a retainer fee and left, feeling a mix of relief and dread. The next week was a blur. I went to work, came home, and tried to act normal. But inside I was a mess. I barely slept, my mind constantly racing with thoughts of what Tom might find. Emily seemed oblivious to my inner turmoil, continuing with her usual routine. Then one evening, Tom called. He asked if we could meet the next day. I agreed, and we set a time and place. I spent the night tossing and turning, my anxiety reaching a boiling point. The next day I met Tom at the same diner. He had a folder with him, which he placed on the table between us. He looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and professionalism. "Jack, I've got the information you asked for," he said, opening the folder. Inside were photos of Emily with the man I had seen her with. They were at various locations around town. Restaurants, parks, even a hotel. The photos left no room for doubt. Emily was having an affair. I felt a lump in my throat as I looked through the photos. There was one of them holding hands, another of them kissing. My worst fears had been confirmed. Tom handed me a written report, detailing his findings. "I'm sorry, Jack," he said. "I know this isn't easy." I nodded, unable to speak. I thanked Tom and paid him the rest of his fee. He offered some words of advice, but I barely heard him. I left the diner in a daze, clutching the folder to my chest. When I got home, Emily was already there. She was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. I stood in the doorway watching her, trying to summon the courage to confront her. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Hey, you're home early," she said. "How was your day?" I took a deep breath and walked into the kitchen, the folder still in my hand. "Emily, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. Her smile faded, and she looked at me with concern. "What is it, Jack?" I placed the folder on the counter and opened it, spreading the photos out in front of her. "Explain these," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily's face went pale as she looked at the photos. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. Jack, she started, but I cut her off. How long, Emily? I asked, my voice shaking with anger. How long has this been going on? She looked down at the photos, tears streaming down her face. About 6 months, she whispered. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. 6 months. Half a year of lies and deceit. I took a step back, trying to process what she had just said. Why, Emily? I asked, my voice breaking. Why did you do this? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. I don't know, Jack. I don't have a good answer. It just happened. I never meant to hurt you. I shook my head, unable to comprehend her words. You never meant to hurt me? How could you say that? Do you have any idea what this has done to me? Emily reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. Jack, please, let me explain, she pleaded. I shook my head again. I don't want to hear it, Emily. I don't think I can ever trust you again. She broke down in sobs, sinking to the floor. I stood there, feeling a mix of anger, betrayal, and sadness. I didn't know what to do, what to say. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, out of the house, and into the cool night air. I walked for what felt like hours, my mind racing. I couldn't go back to that house, not right now. I needed time to think, to figure out my next move. I ended up at a motel on the edge of town, renting a room for the night. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the evening over and over in my mind. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. My life would never be the same again. The next morning, I woke up in the motel room with a splitting headache and a hollow feeling in my chest. The events of the previous day hit me like a freight train. I could still see Emily's tear-streaked face, her voice echoing in my head as she tried to explain. But no explanation would ever be enough. I had been betrayed by the person I trusted most in the world. I checked out of the motel and drove to a nearby diner for breakfast. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about my next steps. I couldn't avoid Emily forever, but I wasn't ready to face her just yet. I needed to get my head straight, to figure out what I wanted to do. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to try and salvage our marriage. But another part of me couldn't imagine ever trusting her again. After breakfast, I decided to take a drive. I needed to clear my head, to get away from everything for a while. I drove aimlessly for hours, through small towns and country roads, trying to process my feelings. By the time I got back to our town, it was late afternoon. I parked outside our house and sat in the car for a while, gathering my courage. When I finally walked through the front door, Emily was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up at me with a mixture of hope and fear. Jack, she said softly, can we talk? I nodded, sitting down in the armchair across from her. I didn't know what to say, so I waited for her to speak. I know I messed up, she began, her voice trembling. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want you to know how sorry I am. I love you, Jack. I don't want to lose you. Her words hit me hard. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, but it didn't erase the pain she had caused. Why, Emily? I asked, my voice breaking. Why did you do it? She looked down at her hands, fidgeting nervously. I don't have a good answer, she admitted. I was lonely, I guess. You were working so much, and I felt like we were drifting apart. Then I met Mark, and things just happened. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. I felt a surge of anger at the mention of his name. Mark, I repeated, my voice laced with bitterness. So that's his name. Emily nodded. Dear viewers, I ask you to subscribe to the channel under this video. I will be very grateful to you. Tears streaming down her face. Yes, but he's not important, Jack. You are. I want to fix this. To make things right between us. I looked at her, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her another chance. But another part of me couldn't forget the images of her with Mark, the lies she had told. I don't know if we can fix this, Emily, I said finally. You've broken my trust, and I don't know if it can be repaired. She nodded, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I understand," she whispered. "But please, give us a chance. Let's go to counseling. Talk to someone. I don't want to lose you." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I'll think about it," I said. "But right now, I need some space. I'm going to stay with a friend for a while." Emily nodded again, wiping her tears. "Okay, Jack. Take all the time you need. I'll be here, waiting." I packed a bag and left the house, my heart heavy with a mix of anger, sadness, and uncertainty. I drove to my friend Tom's place. He was a good guy, someone I could trust. When I explained the situation, he didn't hesitate to offer me a place to stay. "Stay as long as you need, man," he said, clapping me on the back. "We'll get through this together." I appreciated his support, but I knew this was something I had to figure out on my own. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the pain. I avoided Emily's calls and texts, needing time to think. One evening, as I was leaving the office, my boss, Mr. Richards, called me into his office. He was an older man, in his late 50s, with a stern but fair demeanor. "Jack, have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. "I've noticed you've been working late a lot recently. Everything okay?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share. But Mr. Richards had always been a good boss, understanding and supportive. So I decided to tell him the truth. "I've been going through some personal issues," I admitted. "My wife, she had an affair. I found out a few weeks ago, and it's been tough." Mr. Richards nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I'm sorry to hear that, Jack. I know how difficult that can be. If you need some time off, just let me know. Your work has always been excellent, and I don't want you burning out." I appreciated his offer, but I knew staying busy was helping me cope. "Thank you, sir, but I think keeping busy is helping me. I just need some time to figure things out." He nodded again, giving me a reassuring smile. "Take all the time you need, Jack, and if you ever need to talk, my door is always open." I left his office feeling a little lighter. It helped to know that my boss had my back, that I had support at work. But I still had to figure out what to do about Emily. A few days later, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered hesitantly, and to my surprise, it was Mark. "Jack, it's Mark," he said, his voice sounding nervous. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to talk to you." I felt a surge of anger at the sound of his voice. "What do you want?" I demanded. "I just want to apologize," he said quickly. "I never meant to cause all this pain. Emily and I... It was a mistake. I know that now. I just wanted to tell you how sorry I am." I gripped the phone tightly, my anger simmering. "You think an apology makes it better?" I spat. "You ruined my marriage. My life." "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm truly sorry. I just thought you should hear it from me." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to make him feel the pain I was feeling, but another part of me just wanted to move on, to put this whole mess behind me. "Fine," I said finally. "You've apologized. Now stay away from us." Mark agreed, and I hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of relief and anger. I had heard his apology, but it didn't change what had happened. It didn't make the pain go away. The next few weeks were a blur. I continued to stay with Tom, avoiding Emily and trying to focus on work. But eventually, I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't live in limbo forever. One evening, I decided to visit a counselor. I found a therapist named Dr. Wilson, who came highly recommended. I wasn't sure if it would help, but I knew I needed to talk to someone. Dr. Wilson was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a calming presence. She listened patiently as I poured out my story, my fears, and my confusion. "Jack, it's clear that you're going through a very difficult time," she said gently. "It's normal to feel a range of emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal. But it's important to give yourself time to heal and to figure out what you want." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief just from talking to someone who understood. "I don't know if I can ever trust Emily again," I admitted. "But part of me still loves her, still wants to try and make it work." Dr. Wilson nodded. "Trust is something that takes time to rebuild, and it's not easy. But it is possible if both of you are willing to work at it. Counseling can help, but it's important to take things one step at a time." I left her office feeling a little more hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to rebuild what had been broken. I decided to give counseling a try, to see if there was a way to mend our relationship. I called Emily and told her about my decision. She was overjoyed, promising to do whatever it took to make things right. We started seeing Dr. Wilson together, talking through our issues and trying to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to give up, when the pain felt too overwhelming. But there were also moments of hope, glimpses of the love we had once shared. Slowly, we began to make progress. Emily was committed to making amends, and I was trying to open my heart to the possibility of forgiveness. It was a long, difficult journey, but with each session, we took small steps forward. Months passed, and we continued to work on our relationship. There were setbacks, of course, moments of doubt and anger, but there were also moments of connection, of rediscovery. We began to find our way back to each other, slowly but surely. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Emily took my hand in hers. "Jack, I know I hurt you deeply, and I can't change the past, but I want you to know how much I love you, how grateful,